Oops. That's something you have to be careful of with projection paint. Sometimes I do that and I don't notice it until a lot later and get myself in a bit of trouble. Oh, and this is the color palette. I didn't show that. I don't usually use that. What happens is if you hover and have the color picker selected, which is S, and then you click, it'll add the colors to that. In most image editors, the way you color pick is you hold down a button, is usually Control or Alt, and then you click on something to pick the color. In this case, you just have to hover, and I'm not used to that, so oftentimes I'll have like 20 colors by the end I'm painting in this color palette that I didn't even intend to do. It's just kind of a control thing that I'm not used to. But it's alright, it doesn't really hurt anything. And I do sometimes use that color palette for things. So I'm kind of emphasizing these lines and things in here. I'm just putting some orange up there. It's gonna, by the end of it, it's gonna make that look like dirt, the way I'm gonna blend it in. And you could use a soft brush if you wanted for stuff like this, because this is all, when I get into the tighter detail, this will all come together and it'll look okay. Right now it just looks like crap, but it's just the way it starts. This is kind of like the reason I work on the whole thing at once is it's like I could technically stop here. It doesn't look very good, but you know, everything is technically done. But from here I can just spend hours and hours just refining it until it looks really good. Whereas if I just had done this one brick and taken it all the way to full, then I'd have to do it again and again and again and again. It just seems more daunting, and then on top of that, like, this one will wind up being, like, by the time you get up to this brick, you've got new techniques that you've figured out, you're all nice and warmed up, and this one will start looking kind of crappy, and then you'll want to go back and just redo that, and it becomes kind of like an infinite loop. Whereas if you just do the whole thing at once, everything's going to be a lot more even. I think I'm going to warm up the cracks just a bit. You know, just put a little bit of orange in there. And the idea is kind of, you know, the dirt gets clung in here and water washes down, it doesn't quite get it out, and, you know, just things like that. Get a little more tone in this. Throw a little purple in there. A lot of this is, there's going to be a little bit of a cast shadow. You can't do too dramatic of lighting on this stuff, but you can do some. A lot of these little differences in color variation and slight value changes. In the end, I'm gonna, pick and pull little highlights here and there, and it'll be kind of like happy accidents that turn into extra surface detail. I think it's starting to come together. Looks less like splotches of paint, more like solid objects at least. I'm gonna add in some orange down here too for the same reason. It's gonna wind up looking like dirt by the end of it. I think I'm gonna pause here for just a second and see how I'm doing on time. Uh, so there might be an awkward cut in here. I don't know. So I think just to keep this from running on forever, I'm going to, kind of show you how the detail and stuff like that works, and then I'm probably gonna cut and then kind of come back and show you at the end and maybe explain a few more things. Because there's not really any reason, like if I just do one of these, there's not really any reason to go, and paint all of them, because it's the same principles over and over again. But basically the tighter detail you do, I'm just making a little crack here. The tighter detail you do, the sharper your image becomes. So if I just do a crack here and I'm going to really pull in, make some, really detail this thing. And you can just do, it's easy enough, you can even just do dots and things. Just knock little chunks out of the corners. Maybe we'll add a crack over here too. Maybe I'll chisel this whole corner down quite a bit. But you just chisel it off and then throw in some highlights to pull that detail back out, I guess. And another thing you can do, I mean, some of this just gets into, fundamentals of painting, which are a bit, a little broad for just a little single painting demo. Maybe I'll continue doing these and fill in on some of that stuff. But so I want this edge, I really want to pull it out, but it's not a clean edge, it's been eroded, so the lighting on it isn't going to be perfect. Another thing I sometimes do is if you put a fairly dark tone right next to these highlights, they'll really pop. It's, contrast or whatever really pulls in the eye, or pulls attention, I should say. I'm just gonna do basic. I'll do both these bricks, I guess, and then I'm gonna pause the video, paint, do all the detailing kind of off camera, and then come back and maybe, explain some things I did if necessary. I don't. But it's because this is basically the same thing over and over again, just for each brick. But you can see that just pulling in them highlights and putting in little cracks and things really brings it all together, where it doesn't look like random scribbles like this stuff does. It starts to look like a kind of a polished face, but with a lot of color variation in it. So something like that, it starts off really bold and looks awkward, but if you zoom out and you take it into, in the full context of things or whatever, it'll fade, and not draw as much attention to itself. But I think, stuff like that, it adds a lot of life to the thing, I think. I don't want to go too crazy with the cracks and make this thing look shattered or something where, that just wouldn't work. But at the same time, I do find that kind of stuff really fun to paint. I just have to err on the being a bit conservative if I can. You can see it doesn't take much to really pop out these shapes. I'm keeping it pretty simple in this demo, but the cracks and things on this are an area you can really play with stuff like that. Do overgrowth or just cake in some dirt in there and things like that. Just for time's sake or whatever, I'm just keeping this pretty minimal than how I would normally do it. But I find stuff like that really really fun to paint, and it really it adds a lot of character, I think, to stuff like this when you can put things like that in. And then also with the brush strokes, just a second here. When you get these, you got all these varied brush strokes and stuff. Let me make a couple just slightly darker. You get some little slightly darker things like that. If you take just a little bit lighter thing, a lighter shade, and you just kind of really lightly do that, it'll look like even more detail on the stone, kind of like a chunk flaked off a bit. Let me do some on this one too. So again, I got a little kind of abstract shape in there from just from brush strokes, totally accidental. I mean, I didn't intend to get any particular shape. And just really lightly. These are too dark. But then it starts to feel, it feels like little pieces maybe chipped off, like big flat chunks. Anyway, when you get around to this point, it's just putting in more time and refining details over and over again. You could kind of just go on forever at this point. So what I'm going to do is, go ahead and cut this, finish it off, then come back, talk a bit about it, and call this video done. I think because there's just no reason to watch me meticulously detail this thing for another 2 hours or whatever it'll take. So yeah, be back in a sec. All right. Sorry for cutting so much of this. I know that's gonna bother some people, but I just I don't want this to drag on forever. Hopefully at this point though, there's not too much mystery in how the rest of these were done. It is the same technique I showed, repeated over and over again. I didn't change brushes or anything like that. It's if I zoom in and just analyze this one block, you can see, well, I got some orange color in there. It looks like a little purple, some blue, green, and some gray. And then I just pulled out highlights and, maybe put in a little bit of shadow. Same story for every block. It's, time and practice is all you really need if you're not used to painting to get to this point. Another thing I should talk about is when I do like cracks and dirt, I try to ground that kind of stuff in reality a bit, if that makes sense. Like this bottom piece you can see is pretty dirty and worn down and damaged compared to this top piece, which it still has dirt and damage, but just not to the severity of this bottom part. And that's just, it's basically because this is lower to the ground. More dirt's going to accumulate down here, be it just blowing around or even rainwater washing on this down the column is going to just accumulate dirt down there at the bottom. And being low to the ground, even a little kid could climb on here and maybe rub their shoes and chip away these corners and things, where they're less likely to be up here and damage this as much. I just try to keep that stuff in the back of my mind. It's not anything that anybody notices, but I feel that it gives my worlds a bit more authenticity than they otherwise would have. Even if they're highly stylized, it works out that way, which, most of my stuff tends to be pretty stylized. But yeah, I think the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a bit of that gradient back that I had, that I've kind of lost. I'm just going to use this masking tool. If you've never used this, just turn it on, and then all it's doing is whatever you have selected in edit mode, whatever faces, I should say, is what it's going to limit you to paint on. Easy enough. And I'm just going to use that with the fill tool. I was messing with this earlier, and it seems the gradient doesn't work with blend modes. Like normally I would do it like a black to white and just turn on multiply, which will cancel out the white, and then paint it on here, and I'll just get like a darker transition down here to nothing. But blend modes don't seem to be working. So the workaround is I'm just going to go black to black, but then turn down this alpha on one end. It'll give me the same effect, it's just a different way to do it. Let's see, I need to turn strength all the way down. And I just want this to be pretty subtle. Yeah, that's fine. You can see that, it's not anything that I would want anybody to notice necessarily, but it just kind of indicates that there's a little more light up here than there is down here, and that just kind of gives it a bit more depth. That's all. But yeah, I think that's going to do it. I'll try to upload this model somewhere in case anybody wants to download it and look at it up close or whatever. And beyond that, I think I just have to say, hope it helped, and thanks for watching.